thank you for joining me. Today is episode 6 of It's a Free Life. I hope that you are doing well. Today I'm going to be talking about Nicole Arbour's new video, Why to Spank Your Kids. Man, I will admit that it was hard for me to watch that video, not because she is sharing an opinion that I have not heard before, but because she is looked up to by a lot of young people. And because she has such a large audience, I think that violence of any kind is definitely wrong, but violence against children takes it to a whole new level for me. It is something that I have personal experience with. I was raised being spanked. I know the effects that it had on me then, and I know that the effects that it has on me now as an adult, and it is not something that I take lightly. Not only is she advocating for violence to continue, but she is telling people that have been traumatized by spanking that it is okay and that they are just pussies and it's not a big deal. She is sending a message to future parents, telling them that spanking is the only way to be a good parent. And she's also reaffirming to the parents that already spank their children that what they are doing is perfectly acceptable and that they should probably be doing more of it. So without further ado, let's dive right in. So that means then that she has met all children that have not been spanked and that every single one of them is an asshole? That she can easily clump them all together like that? I just don't think so. I'm not buying into that. This actually isn't the first generation of children that hasn't been spanked, because currently 85% of American households spank their children. So the amount of children that are being spanked versus the amount of children that aren't being spanked is very, very small. Keep in mind, we are only talking about spanking. We are not talking about other forms of abuse. So even the children that aren't being spanked are most likely experiencing another kind of abuse or neglect. Peaceful parenting is a new philosophy, new in terms of people are actually starting to do it, and there's a little bit more of that going on in the world. But again, those numbers are very, very small compared to the amount of children that are still being spanked or otherwise abused. Yeah, that's because those children grew up to be scientists, to study spanking, because they knew that it had damaging effects on them, and they are devoting their lives to studying something in order to better the world. I don't think that anyone that has ever spoken out or continues to speak out against spanking would say that if you were spanked, you are unable to become successful. Just because you have been through some kind of abuse or trauma in your life doesn't mean that you can't come out better on the end of that, or that you can't go on to be successful. Obviously, this has been true for millions of people that have suffered from some kind of trauma or abuse that are now millionaires, that are now celebrities, that are now doing all of these really huge, crazy, amazing things in the world. That doesn't mean that the abuse that they suffered is okay, or that they came out better because of this abuse. I do agree that there are people that are more offended easily in this world, especially from opinions of people that they will never meet. I think that she's kind of specifically talking about the Tumblr world in this video, and, gender fluidity and feminism type things and safe spaces and trigger warnings and people getting upset by others sharing their opinions. And I get that, but that's not sensitivity. Sensitivity is empathy. Sensitivity is being in touch with your emotions. Sensitivity is caring about other people's emotions. I consider myself to be a sensitive person, but I also consider myself to be able to take criticism well. I consider myself to not be offended easily, especially by people online or by people that I've never met. So there's a difference between what she's talking about and being sensitive. There is not enough sensitivity in this world. That's why there's a lot of violence. If there was more sensitivity, in the true sense, not in the sense of being offended easily, I think that this world would be a lot more peaceful of a place. I think that there would be a lot more love, because all of those things are tied into sensitivity. Not being upset by someone online. That's not being sensitive. That is being crazy. If you are not in control of your emotions, if you're blaming other people for your emotions, if you're not taking responsibility for your actions, again, that's not sensitivity. That is being a victim, and being a victim is not the same as being sensitive. One thing that she does a lot of in this video is that she equates being a parent directly with being mean and scary, as though if you are not being mean and scary, you are not in any kind of way being a parent. Perhaps she has not spent that much time around children. I have been a nanny for 6 years, so I have been more or less a parent to a lot of children. And let me tell you, even without firsthand experience of being a mother, I already know that being a parent involves so much more than just the discipline aspect. That is just one part of parenting, one small part. There are so many other factors, there are so many other areas. You don't have to be mean to have boundaries, and you don't have to be mean to have discipline. If you aren't being mean, it doesn't mean that you're not being a parent. In fact, it means you're being a good parent. What? That is like saying that children with blonde hair grow up to be adults. Yeah, no shit. What does spanking have to do with the fact that they do or don't grow up to be adults? Is there a fact out there saying that children that weren't spanked don't grow up to be adults? I don't think so. In fact, I would actually think that it's the exact opposite. I believe that it's 90% or even higher of children in a youth correction facility have been spanked. So that does not even include any other type of abuse, which they have most likely all endured. This is just spanking. So those children are much more likely to be involved in violence, in theft, and in other harmful drugs or activities. I would think that those people are actually much more likely to die at a young age than those that are raised peacefully, aka children raised with no physical, mental, or emotional abuse of any kind. There is this widespread and popular idea that in order to get children to stay safe, we have to hurt them, because that's the easiest way to teach them that running into the street or touching the stove is dangerous. Like I said, I've been working with children for several years now, so of course I've been in countless situations where something unsafe is about to happen or did happen. I understand the fear in that situation, and I also understand kind of the anger that you get at yourself. But I think that a lot of people that lash out at their children aren't doing it for that child's best interest. They're doing it because they have a lot of uncomfortable feelings. They're doing it because they don't want to reflect on themselves as a parent and as a person and to say, hey, this is where I failed. I allowed a situation to happen where my child was able to run into the street. Obviously, my child is too young to understand logic, or else I would be explaining to them the importance of not running into the street. If I want someone in my life to understand something, I sit them down and I talk to them with logic and explanation. Again, if your child is too small to understand logic, why would he or she understand why you were hitting them in the first place? If a child is just running around outside, they don't understand that a street is different from a sidewalk. It's all the same to them. I have had children that are 3 years old ask me why they can't run into the street. And in my mind, I'm like, well, because there's traffic, of course. But they've been alive on this earth for 3 years. We have been alive on this earth for at least 20 years. If you are, that's a young age to be a parent. But a lot of parents are much older than that. You have to be able to explain to your child why this is not okay or why this is dangerous. Using fear and using violence to try to explain your point is a cowardly and it is a failing tactic as a parent. It is not any kind of way to communicate with a child. You are merely lashing out your feelings. You are not using logic. You are not trying to teach any kind of lesson. You just want that memory for that child to be based around fear, so that the next time they see a street, they won't remember, oh wow, that's right, I can actually get really hurt by this. This is actually a really dangerous situation. You are just making that child remember the time that you spanked them for going into the street. That's not teaching them anything. That's just making them scared. That's just making them afraid to get hurt by you again. Is that really the kind of connection that you want with your child? For them to just remember these lessons as fear and violent based? As a parent, I would really hope that you would not want that for your child. Obviously, this quote, I don't know. I mean, when I heard it, I was like, that's really your explanation? You are taking a figurehead of the most violent institution in the world to say that he was probably spanked too? Okay, thanks for making my point. I absolutely don't want anything to do with spanking if it makes someone turn into a politician that advocates for violence on a scale of millions and millions of people. Yeah, Obama was probably spanked, and he's signing off on drone strikes to kill innocent children. Yeah, way to go, Obama. Your parents were doing it right. Man, tragic. Here we are again with the idea that the only way to teach a child is to use fear and violence. Yes, there are a lot of uncomfortable things that we have to deal with in life, whether that's in situations or hearing other people's opinions or thoughts. But again, there are so many different ways to teach that lesson other than scaring a child. Because instead, what you are teaching a child when you use fear and violence, you aren't teaching them that dealing with uncomfortable situations is a part of life. You are teaching them that fear, that belittling someone, that scaring someone, that tolerating that fear from someone, that hurting physically, mentally, or emotionally, abusing someone is acceptable. And that we just have to tolerate that. That is why a lot of children that come from a broken childhood, whether that's physical, mental, or emotional abuse, grow up and as adults, they join relationships that are the exact same way that their childhoods were. That's because they were taught that being uncomfortable in those kinds of situations is perfectly acceptable. It is not. That is not something I would ever want to teach to a child. Instead, I would want to teach a child that yes, of course, there are times in life where things are a little bit uncomfortable, but you do not ever have to tolerate someone hurting you or someone scaring you, ever. There is not a direct correlation between children that are spanked and children that are posting naked selfies online. Children that are acting out in premature sexual behavior or that are acting out in drugs and violence or theft are children that come from broken homes, are children that do not have open and honest communication with their parents, that don't feel like that they are in an environment where they are supported, where they are able to be heard, where they are able to get positive feedback, where they're able to share things that are going on in their own lives, because they are afraid, because they were spanked, because they were taught that if you do something wrong, you're going to get punished for it. So those children are not going to be honest about what is going on. And they're not going to say, hey, Mom, I took a naked selfie and I sent it to someone and now all of these negative things, all of these negative repercussions are happening. That's not going to happen. Or they're not going to say, hey, Mom, I'm thinking about sending this naked picture to a boy because I really like him. What are your thoughts? They're going to act out in these negative ways and they're going to hide it from their parents. And those negative behaviors that are being hidden are just going to keep growing and growing and growing, all the while these parents remain clueless. Again, this has nothing to do with the fact that these children weren't spanked enough. It has to do with the fact that these children were spanked, or that these children were abused in other kinds of ways or neglected, that they do not have a trusting relationship with their caregiver or with their parents. Yes, exactly my point. Those children are not learning that sending a naked photo, might not be the classiest thing to do or might not be the best way to get the attention of someone. In fact, it is just, especially at such a young age, it is likely going to hurt you instead of help you in any kind of way. You're not learning any of those things because no one is explaining it to you. You are just scared. You just think, well, if I do this certain thing, then I'm going to get hurt, so I'm not going to do that thing. There's no logic. Again, you are not teaching your child anything. You are not teaching your child, who is likely going to be a future parent, to teach their children those kinds of lessons. You are teaching your children fear, and your children will grow up to be parents that are teaching their children fear and violence as well. And so the cycle continues. Oh, it happens everywhere. It happens with all the kids, so it's okay. Man, I am so sick of hearing that excuse. Things that go on in the world are not okay just because it's happening on a large scale. Just because your friends were getting spanked and just because my friends were getting spanked doesn't mean that it's okay. At all. The fact that your mom decided to spank you out in public is so tragic and so heartbreaking. Not that I think it's okay to happen indoors or outside of the house. It's not okay to happen anywhere, but the fact that she did it in public and was perfectly okay with it is so sad and traumatic. Very, very sad that no one else in public ever spoke up or ever said to you, hey, little child, it's not okay that your mom's beating you. I know that a lot of people have negative feelings against speaking out how other people raise their children. I do not. I don't think that having an opinion is wrong at all. If I see someone yelling at their child in public or spanking their child, you're damn right I'm going to say something about it. Even if I'm just saying to that child quickly, hey, it's not okay that your mom's hitting you, and I hope that you can remember me telling you this, because at least that child is hearing someone say that it is not okay. I have absolute disgust for people in public that are screaming or hitting their children, listening to their children cry. It is absolutely horrible to watch. It brings up really awful and tragic memories from my own childhood, and it is absolutely not something that I tolerate to see in public. And if you see anyone else in public abusing their child, I highly suggest stepping up. I highly suggest being a bigger man and saying something. That is not to say that I think that you will change that parent's mind. In fact, I don't think that you will, because those kinds of people aren't obviously logical or thinking very much at all. So they are likely not going to listen to a stranger that is telling them not to hit their children. I think that the best way to go about it is to stay calm. I don't think that reacting in anger to them is going to help the situation at all. Again, I think that the most important thing is just for the child to hear that it is not okay and that someone else in public recognizes the abuse and the trauma that is happening. Obviously, these all fall under the same category. Calling a tomato does not change the fact that it is a tomato. Beating the fuck out of your child, obviously that means that you are angry. If you are scaring your child into behaving properly, whatever that means, you are an angry person. Fear is anger with a different face. If your child, as she mentioned in her quote, until they can comprehend what they are doing, if they can't comprehend what they are doing, why in the world would they be able to comprehend these violent and fearful tactics, manipulative tactics that you are using on them? Depression and drug and or alcohol addiction or trouble communicating your emotions are all effects of having a broken childhood. They are not things that children that are raised peacefully go through. I have personally had a hard time with communicating my emotions now that I'm in a loving and an honest and a trusting relationship. It has been quite the wake-up call as to how much my childhood affected me in these kinds of ways, and it has been really difficult and it has been really challenging. That is not something that I ever make light of. It is not something that it is funny to me, and it's not something that is a joke to me, and it's definitely not something that I wish upon anyone else. I know that people that have been addicted to drugs or alcohol also do not wish that on anyone else. I also know that people that are depressed don't wish that on anyone else, because those things are pure fucking misery, pure living hell. People that have been traumatized have to live through as adults. The fact that it is just being made of light of in this video, that people that are actually suffering from things, that we're just weak and that's just a part of life, I don't accept that. I absolutely do not. People deserve better than that. I do not wish those things upon anyone. It should never be the norm. It should never be expected that this is what we go through. The world deserves better than that. Children deserve better than that. Adults deserve better than that. Here we are again, once more, seeing that she's trying to make a point that somehow not being spanked enough makes children act out in disrespectful ways. Children that are raised in violence and in fear do not have a respect for authority or for adults. Of course, why would they? Adults were never respecting them as a child. So why would these children grow up to be adults that are respecting of other people's opinions or that have any kind of compassion? They won't, because they were not raised that way. Here's the lowdown on raising children. They mimic your behavior. They enter into relationships that reflect the relationships that they saw around them as children. They treat people the way that they see you treat people. So if you are yelling at other people, if you treat people with violence, if you treat people with fear and you use scare tactics to get what you want, that is exactly how your child is going to be. Whether or not they do those same exact tactics as you or they come up with their own, that is to be determined. Exactly. She admits it. She has no idea. And she doesn't. She does not make any valid points other than she thinks that because it happened to her, then it is acceptable, that it happened to her friends, so it must be acceptable, that children posting naked selfies of themselves online or talking shit in YouTube comments is somehow a reflection that they weren't hid enough or that they weren't scared enough as a child. I am disturbed that she makes light of such trauma and such tragic things that happened to the most innocent group of people in society, which is children. She's advocating for violence against the only group of people in society other than the elderly that cannot defend themselves. That is cowardly, that is selfish. She's sending a destructible message to people, and I hope that people see through that bullshit. I hope that people think twice before they hit their child. I hope that peaceful parenting continues to grow in popularity. I think that it is truly the best way to heal the world is by starting at home, by teaching your children from the very first day of their life that being scared by someone else, being violated by someone else, is never acceptable under any circumstance. Below, I'm going to link a video that is my personal favorite on the subject from Free Domain Radio. It is filled with so many useful facts, lots of information. Within that video are resources where they got their information. Share anything along these lines that will resonate with someone that you might know. If you are hitting your child or you know someone that is hitting your child, I highly suggest sending resources, learning about it, whatever it takes for this to stop. I know it's not going to be a quick process. That's why I'm just hoping to be another voice of reason for people out there. For people out there that have suffered from child abuse. I do not make light of your situation. I do not think it is acceptable to think that it is funny or to think that we are weak for speaking out against it. You are strong. If you need help, seek therapy, seek counseling, seek online support, whatever it is you need. Work through those feelings, work through that trauma. Let's move on from it. Let's spread a better message to the children of future generations that violence and fear are not acceptable, that they are not any kind of way to grow humanity in a positive way. I hope in the future that instead of seeing messages like, oh, you need to hit your kids more from people like fucking Nicole Arbour, that instead we will be seeing messages such as, hey, here's why it's not acceptable to hit your child. Here are ways to deal with frustrating situations as a parent, instead of these cowardly, selfish acts of violence and hate. With that being said, take care. Don't forget to be kind to your children. Cheers.